Save him! It's going to tear him apart!
The voice cut through the morning like a chainsaw. It was Marlene James, the next-door neighbor, screaming from her porch, her phone shaking in her hand as she dialed 911. Beyond the picket fence, in the wide backyard of Gerald Ruston's property, a white-tailed deer was stomping furiously, not grazing, not running, attacking. A man, probably in his 60s, lay crumpled on the concrete patio, arms raised in a useless attempt to shield himself. His shirt was already soaked in blood. The deer lowered its antlers and rammed him again, and again. Marlene's scream came again. "Oh my God, Gerald, no, stop!" But there was no stopping it. The animal's hooves crashed down with terrifying precision. The sounds were all wrong. No thudding of hooves in soft grass, no gentle sniffing or rustling. Just cracks, stomps, and a horrifying wet thud that silenced the birds in the trees. By the time the sheriff's deputy pulled into the driveway, it was already too late. What used to be a quiet Texas neighborhood was now a crime scene. And the killer? It wasn't a man. It was a deer. Before we go any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Animal Story, where real stories of animals and the people who love them come to life. Every week, we bring you unforgettable true tales, filled with emotion, danger, and sometimes tragedy. So, if you care about animals and the humans who walk beside them, don't miss what comes next. Hit that bell and let's get into it. To understand what happened that October morning in 2006, we need to go back. Back to when a lonely old man brought a helpless little fawn into his life and changed both of their destinies forever. Gerald Ruston was a retired firefighter, 66 years old, living on a modest piece of land just outside of Houston, Texas. His days were slow and simple: morning coffee, evening walks, weekend fishing trips. He'd lived through heartbreak, losing his wife to cancer 5 years earlier, and since then he'd mostly kept to himself. But Gerald had a soft heart. That's why, one rainy morning in the fall of 2002, when he found a tiny fawn, barely able to stand, lying near the edge of the woods, he didn't call animal control. He didn't leave it. He picked it up, wrapped it in an old blanket, and carried it home. "I didn't plan to keep him," Gerald later told a local reporter, "but he looked at me like he already belonged." The fawn was weak, starving, and had a small cut above one eye. Gerald cleaned the wound, bottle-fed it warm milk, and built a little pen for it beside his garden. He named it Buck. And for 4 years, Buck wasn't just a deer. He was family. Neighbors would see Gerald sitting on the porch with Buck lying at his feet like a Labrador. He taught Buck to respond to a whistle, follow him through the fields, and even stop at the edge of the road when cars passed. Local kids came by to feed Buck apples through the fence. People took pictures. Some even joked Gerald should start a TikTok, back when that wasn't even a thing yet. Buck became something of a neighborhood legend. A wild animal raised in peace, tame as a house cat. But nature has rules. And one day, Buck remembered them. What happened next would leave an entire community stunned and raise chilling questions about the lines between love and instinct. But before we go there, Gerald Ruston didn't talk much. He wasn't the type to show off or share feelings with strangers. But those who knew him, his neighbors, his barber, the checker at the Piggly Wiggly, knew this. He was a good man, the kind who waved at every car that passed, the kind who shoveled the neighbor's driveway even if they didn't ask, the kind who, when you asked how he was doing, always answered, "Can't complain." After his wife, Margaret, passed in 2001, Gerald changed. He didn't sell the house they'd lived in for 30 years. He kept her coffee mug by the sink. Her gardening gloves hung on a nail in the shed. It was like he was frozen in time, walking through the same routines day in and day out, until Buck came along. It was October 2002 when Gerald found the fawn. The little guy was shivering in the mud just off County Road 12. No mama deer in sight. The legs were so thin it was a miracle they could hold him up. One ear was torn, probably from a barbed wire fence. Gerald lifted him gently, like he was holding a newborn. The fawn didn't fight. It just stared with those wide, glassy eyes, trusting him instantly. He looked like he'd already given up. Gerald once said to his friend Ron, "I couldn't leave him there." Back home, Gerald cleaned him up, wrapped him in an old flannel shirt, and laid him beside the fireplace. He warmed up some goat milk, fed him from a bottle every few hours, gave him a name, Buck. What started as rescue turned into a friendship no one saw coming. Buck grew fast, but he never outgrew Gerald. He followed the old man around the property like a puppy, even nudging open the screen door to come inside. Gerald never trained him to do tricks, but Buck seemed to understand. When Gerald said, "Stay," Buck stayed. When he said, "Let's walk," Buck trotted beside him. They ate breakfast together. Gerald would sit on the porch with his eggs and coffee, and Buck would stand just beside him chewing an apple. At night, Buck sometimes slept just outside the bedroom window, curled up in the flower bed where Margaret once planted tulips. To Gerald, Buck wasn't just an animal. He saved me as much as I saved him, he once wrote in a letter to his cousin. That deer gave him something to take care of, a reason to wake up. A heartbeat in a house that had grown too quiet. People started noticing. Local kids came to visit Buck after school. Families brought carrots and apples just to see the porch deer. Gerald let them pet him through the fence. He even put up a little chalkboard that read, "Buck is friendly. Just don't spook him." A regional newspaper ran a story, "The Deer Whisperer of Texas." Photos showed Buck nuzzling Gerald's shoulder like they were old friends swapping stories. It became a feel-good tale, a reminder that kindness could still bloom in the world, even between man and wild. And yet, for all the smiles, some people were worried. "You know that thing's gonna get big," Ron told Gerald once over a beer. "Real big, and you can't tame nature forever." But Gerald just smiled and shook his head. "Buck's different. He knows me. He trusts me." Maybe he was right. For 4 years, Buck never so much as kicked a bucket out of place. Maybe trust was stronger than instinct. Maybe love really could change the wild. But behind Buck's soft eyes, something ancient was waiting. And when the season changed, so would everything else. For nearly 4 years, Buck and Gerald were inseparable. You'd be driving down County Road 12 and see the old man walking the fence line, and right behind him, like a loyal shadow, was Buck. That white tail bouncing gently, ears twitching at every sound, but eyes always fixed on the man who raised him. Some mornings, Gerald would take his coffee outside and talk to Buck like he was an old friend. "Frost's coming early this year," he'd mutter, or, "Margaret always hated this wind." Buck would listen. He'd tilt his head, blink slowly, and lean in like he understood every word. It didn't matter that Buck couldn't speak. The connection was there, unspoken, unbreakable. Gerald never treated him like livestock. No pens, no rope. Buck had the run of the land, 5 wide acres, a couple apple trees, and a shaded patch where wildflowers grew each spring. But no matter where Buck wandered, he always came back. Neighbors would sometimes stop to watch. Kids rode their bikes past the property, just hoping to spot the deer guy. "You two were like a Disney movie," Marlene James said later. It was beautiful, almost unreal. Buck wasn't just tame, he was gentle. He let toddlers pet his nose. He licked crumbs off picnic tables without knocking over a thing. Once a stray cat wandered into the yard and curled up between his legs. Buck didn't flinch. Gerald chuckled for days about that one. "He's better behaved than most folks I know," he'd joke. And for a long time, nobody doubted that. But then came the fall of 2006. The air turned sharper. The nights got longer. And something small at first, started to shift. Buck stopped coming when Gerald whistled. He started pacing the yard at night, scraping his hooves into the dirt, leaving deep, circular ruts like a restless horse. His eyes, once soft and brown, sometimes flashed darker, harder, like something old was waking up behind them. At first, Gerald brushed it off. "He's just growing up," he told Ron one afternoon. "Probably just needs to blow off some steam." But Ron wasn't so sure. He'd grown up around deer, hunted them, knew their ways. "You ever seen a buck during the rut, Gerald?" he asked. "They don't think, they just react." Gerald waved him off. "Buck's not like that, he knows me." Others noticed too. Marlene, the neighbor, said she heard strange, low grunts coming from the yard at night. A UPS driver swore Buck lowered his antlers when he stepped out of the truck. One day, Buck charged the fence when a neighborhood dog walked too close. He didn't make contact, but it was enough to rattle folks. Gerald downplayed it all. "He's just feeling his oats," he'd say, like a proud dad of a rowdy teenager. But something deeper was shifting. Something that had nothing to do with feelings. It was biology. White-tailed deer, especially males, become aggressive during mating season. It's called the rut. Their testosterone spikes, they fight, they chase, they see threats where there aren't any. Even the tamest buck can become unpredictable. Gerald probably knew that. He just didn't want to believe it applied to Buck. One afternoon, a wildlife officer named Curtis Lyle stopped by. Someone had called the county office reporting an unusual situation with a domesticated deer. Curtis knocked and Gerald invited him in for coffee. They sat on the porch while Buck watched from the edge of the garden. "Mr. Ruston," Curtis said gently, "that animal's a buck. He's not meant to be in a backyard, especially not this time of year." Gerald sipped his coffee, calm as ever. "I appreciate your concern, son, but you don't know him like I do." Curtis didn't push it. He left his card on the table and said, "Call me if things change." But things were already changing, they just hadn't turned deadly. Yet. October in East Texas is a strange kind of quiet. The wind turns sharp, the air smells like dry leaves and old wood, and the sun starts setting just a little too early. For most folks, it's hunting season. For bucks like Buck, it's something much older, something primal. And this October, Buck wasn't himself anymore. Gerald first noticed it one morning when he reached out to scratch Buck behind the ear, something he'd done for years. Buck jerked his head away, then came the grunting. Deep, rhythmic, almost like growling. Buck would pace the backyard in tight, angry circles. He scraped his antlers against the shed door so hard that flakes of paint chipped off. One morning, Gerald found a dent in his truck fender. Looked like something had rammed it. Hard. Still, he wasn't alarmed. "He's just feeling the season," he told Marlene. "They go through moods, like teenagers." But this wasn't a mood. It was a warning. The wildlife officer, Curtis Lyle, came back. "I don't mean to interfere," he said gently, "but this animal's showing signs of rutting behavior, aggression, territory defense. It's not personal, it's instinct." Gerald nodded but didn't look convinced. "You think he'd hurt me?" "I think he's not thinking at all," Curtis replied. "That's the danger." But Gerald couldn't see Buck that way. "He's not just an animal to me, officer," Gerald said. "He's family. And maybe that was the real problem." Then came the final straw. A neighborhood kid tossed an apple core over the fence like he always did. Buck lunged, but not for the apple. He went straight for the fence. He didn't break through, but the wood cracked. Splinters flew. The kid screamed and ran home in tears. After that, people stopped visiting. The chalkboard sign came down. Even Ron, his oldest friend, stopped coming by for Sunday coffee. "Gerald," he said on the phone, "you've got to do something. He's not safe anymore." But Gerald just sighed. "You don't give up on your own," he said. "You just don't." The day before it happened, Buck charged Gerald for the first time. It wasn't a full-on attack, more like a warning. Gerald had stepped out with a pail of oats, same as every morning. Buck lowered his head and made a short, aggressive hop forward, antlers pointed straight at Gerald's chest. Gerald froze. Then Buck stopped, snorted, and walked away. Gerald stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, pail still in hand. He told himself it was just a bad moment, a blip. He didn't tell anyone. That night, Gerald called his cousin. "I don't know what's going on with him," he admitted. "It's like he's someone else lately." "Maybe it's time," his cousin said softly. "Maybe Buck doesn't belong in a backyard anymore." Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, "I just don't want to be alone again." He stayed up late that night, sat on the back porch with a blanket over his shoulders, staring out into the dark yard. Buck was standing at the far end near the tree line, his body still but his eyes gleaming in the porch light. He didn't come when Gerald called, didn't move at all, just watched. Like a stranger, like a storm, waiting to break. The next morning was just like any other. Gerald stepped outside with the oat bucket, wore his flannel shirt, slipped on those old rubber boots Margaret used to hate. He didn't know it would be his last walk into the yard, but the signs were all there, the grunts, the pacing, the antlers, the instinct. He just didn't want to believe the deer he raised could become something else, something deadly. It was a Tuesday morning, cool, dry, the kind of October morning East Texans call perfect. Gerald Ruston woke early, as always. He brewed his coffee, fed the cat that still wandered over from next door, and grabbed the worn pail of oats from its usual hook by the back door. Buck was already out there, standing in the middle of the yard, still as a statue. His breath misted in the cool air. His antlers looked larger than ever, sharper. Gerald stepped out into the yard like he had 1,000 times before. "Morning, buddy," he called. Buck didn't move. Gerald shook the pail. "Come on now, let's eat." Still nothing. He took another step forward. That's when it happened. In a split second, Buck's muscles coiled and he charged. No warning. No hesitation. Just raw, unstoppable force. The first blow sent Gerald stumbling backward. The sound of antler meeting bone echoed across the quiet yard. The bucket flew from his hands, oats scattering like dust in the wind. "Buck, no. Stop," he shouted, hands up. But Buck was gone. The version of him Gerald knew, the gentle one, the companion, that Buck didn't exist anymore. This was instinct, rage, a wild animal defending territory, driven by hormones and primal memory. The second strike came fast, harder, lower. It caught Gerald in the ribs. He fell to the ground with a grunt. The wind knocked clean out of him. Then Buck reared up on his hind legs and came down. Once, twice, 3 times. Hooves crashing into Gerald's chest, his arms, his skull. He screamed, but it came out broken. Weak, like wind through torn leaves. Across the fence, Marlene James had just stepped onto her porch with a cup of tea. She froze, the mug slipping from her fingers and shattering on the steps. "Oh my God, Gerald!" She ran inside to grab the phone. Dialed 911 with shaking hands. "There's a deer. It's attacking him. It's stomping him. Please, you have to come now." But minutes were seconds, and seconds were eternity. By the time deputies arrived, Gerald was no longer moving. Buck stood over him, sides heaving, chest glistening with sweat and blood. He didn't run when they approached. He didn't bolt. He just stared them down, wild-eyed like they were next. One of the officers fired a warning shot into the air. Buck didn't flinch. The second shot hit him clean in the shoulder. He stumbled, then fell beside Gerald's motionless body. Silence. Just the wind and the smell of death. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was catastrophic. Crushed ribs, a fractured skull, internal bleeding too severe to stop. Gerald Ruston, firefighter, husband, animal lover, was pronounced dead at the scene, killed by the very creature he had raised, loved, and trusted more than anyone. Later that day, the sheriff held a press conference. There was no malicious intent here, he said. This wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a tragic collision between love and nature. Mr. Ruston treated that deer like family, but wild animals don't always stay that way. Neighbors lit candles. Someone left a note by the gate that read, "We loved Buck too." But Gerald didn't deserve this. Ron didn't come to the vigil. He sat alone on his porch holding a picture of Gerald and Buck from years ago, smiling on a summer afternoon, unaware of the storm that time would bring. Nobody wanted to talk about the end, about the blood, or the screams, or the way Buck's eyes didn't look like Buck's anymore. But the silence said enough. In the days that followed Gerald Ruston's death, the neighborhood felt different, quieter. Nobody mowed their lawn that week. The mail carrier walked a little slower past the Ruston property. The kids who used to stop and feed Buck from behind the fence didn't ride their bikes down that stretch of road anymore. The gate stayed closed, a single wreath, pine branches, wrapped in twine, hung from the fence post with a handwritten sign beneath it. "Rest in peace, Gerald. We know you meant well." The county sheriff's report confirmed what many had already suspected. The attack was triggered by rutting aggression, a natural part of a male deer's behavior during mating season. Buck wasn't provoked. He wasn't mistreated. He simply acted like a wild animal. The officers who responded that morning had no choice. Buck had become dangerous, unpredictable, lethal. But that didn't stop the public debate. Some people called Gerald foolish. "You don't turn a wild buck into a pet," they said. "You just don't." Others defended him. He was lonely. He did what he thought was kind. A few called it a tragedy. A few blamed the system. But most just shook their heads and whispered the same impossible question. How could something so loved turn like that? Curtis Lyle, the wildlife officer, attended Gerald's funeral. He stood near the back of the chapel, hat in hand, and spoke quietly afterward. "I warned him," he said to Marlene James, "but it wasn't just about ignoring advice. He truly believed Buck was different. That love had changed him." Marlene nodded, eyes glassy. "Maybe it did, but not enough." Gerald's cousin inherited the house. He didn't change much, kept the porch chairs, left the flower bed untouched, but the yard stayed empty after that. No more animals, no new pets, just a photo on the fireplace mantel. Gerald in his flannel shirt, one hand resting gently on Buck's back, both smiling, both at peace, before everything fell apart. Some say Gerald died because he was too trusting. Others say he died doing what he loved, believing in something wild and beautiful and good. Maybe both are true. Maybe that's what makes it so hard to talk about. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first time something like this happened, and it won't be the last. All across America, people adopt exotic or wild animals, believing love can erase instinct. From backyard tigers in Oklahoma to chimpanzees in Connecticut to deer in rural Texas, the stories often start with love, and too often, they end in blood. So maybe the question we need to ask ourselves isn't about what Buck did. Maybe it's about what we choose to believe. If it were you, would you step into that yard? Would you treat a wild animal like family? Would you trust love to overcome something born in bone and blood? Or are we humanizing animals in a way that puts both them and us in danger? Thanks for watching this episode of Animal Story. If this story moved you or made you think, please consider subscribing to our channel. We share real stories about animals, loyalty, heartbreak, and the powerful bond we share with the natural world. Like this video if you believe stories like Gerald's deserve to be remembered. Comment below. Do you think Buck could have ever been truly tamed? And don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a story like this, because sometimes the animals we love are still wild underneath. End.